The event is started.
Let me know when it says started. All right, well, we'll get started and the camera will catch up.
Yep.
So for the sake of those on the camera, this is the San Francisco PHP meetup group. It's hosted here by Mashery. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully you all knew that too. If you didn't, well, stick around anyway. It should be interesting. Getting the minutiae out of the way real quick. Tonight's event is sponsored by Mashery. They're hosting the facility, food, George and Jacob's time. George is the speaker tonight. He'll be talking about Behat testing or behavioral driven development using Behat. Sorry. And then Jacob's co-organizer, so Mashery sponsors his time. They got a bunch of t-shirts back there for us to raffle off or give away. There's a lot of them, so I'm not sure which it'll be. We have a few t-shirts tonight from Zend. This one here, they give to us their leftovers from Zend or ChefConf. Engine Yard gave us a few t-shirts to give away. Engine Yard is also sponsoring a logo for us. They're actively working on coming up with a nice logo for our group that incorporates PHP in San Francisco, all kind of in a fun way, so we can get want to get hats and t-shirts and stickers and all that kind of fun stuff. O'Reilly, they gave us, we have 3 books from O'Reilly that we'll raffle off. They sponsor us every month with 2 or 3 books to give away all the time, as well as when conferences come up, they give that away. Shoot, am I forgetting anybody, Jacob?
Not that I can.
All right, I think that's everybody. If I forgot someone, I apologize. But of everybody I mentioned, we have more swag next month for it, so that'll go there. Coming up next month on May 13th will be Scaling Lamp Doesn't Have to Suck. That's going to be held at Constant Contact. And Steve Corona, he's
literally wrote the book on scaling PHP.
Yes. He works at Life 360 right now. He's the head of the API there. He'll be talking about scaling PHP in a good, easy way. Be at Constant Contact May 13th. We also are going to be doing a joint meetup at the end of May with the SF Symphony group. So, where, Jacob, there you are. Go ahead and say what that's about.
So, Fabien Clotencier, who's the creator of the Symphony framework, is going to be in town, and he wants to do a talk on the future of PHP. He's a pretty interesting guy, so yeah, I'm excited about it. I'll be there.
Yeah, should be good. As always, people are either hiring or looking to be hired. So let's start off by, is anybody here looking for a job? Raise your hands higher. All right, there we go. So those of you that are looking to hire someone, there you go. Connect. It'll work well. We're also going to try a slightly different format tonight. We've kind of been talking about introducing quick lightning talks or intro talks at the beginning of the event. So Jacob's going to give it a shot with us, do kind of a 5-minute, maybe 7-minute talk. Do that, and then we'll switch over to the main thing. I want to get your feedback afterwards if that worked for you or not, to see if it's something we should continue doing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jacob.
Everyone doing okay tonight?
Yeah.
George, I need your password.
Oh. So secure. Makes
Oh,
everything
it's
different.
George.
Yeah.
It's 8 asterisks. Why didn't I guess that?
So I've been doing a lot of exploring programming languages and that sort of thing lately. And one of the things that really struck me in what I've looked at is just seeing the simple representation of what bytecode actually is. And this is what sparked my kind of adventure. And so I wanted to share and see if I could spark an adventure in anybody else. So what is bytecode? Bytecode is kind of an abbreviated form of code. It's meant for running software and not for editing. Like the code you write in PHP or whatever, that's meant to be built so that it's easy to maintain, so that it's easy to edit, so that humans can understand it. Bytecode is built for computers. It's built so that the computer can run it efficiently. Bytecodes contain opcodes and arguments, essentially. An opcode is an instruction
What happened to the projector?
Oh, yay. Well, while we figure that out, the opcode is an instruction of what to do. And then the arguments are what are required for that instruction. We will have to wait because we need the next slide, I believe.
Everything's plugged in. I don't know what to do with it.
There's never been a first slide.
I see it nicely on the video.
Those. So you change it, you put it on a projector.
Yeah, I don't have my glasses on, so I can't actually see.
HDMI 1.
That's HDMI 2?
No, it's an HDMI 1.
Enter. Engage. Engage so.
Hey! All
There we
right.
go. Yay! All right, after our short intermission there. So, opcodes really are a vocabulary. They're kind of just a defined dictionary that you've agreed that you're going to talk to the computer with. When you look at CPUs, you see the SSE instruction set from way back when. And all those instruction sets are different vocabularies that the CPU knows how to speak. Opcodes are the same sort of thing. So for our demo here, we're just having a very simple dictionary, a very simple vocabulary of what we're talking about. We use PU to push something onto the stack, PO to pop it off of the stack, AD to add them together, and PR to print. So traditional bytecode powered execution environments look like this. You'll have your bytecode, you'll have your literal table, which contains integers and strings and stuff used throughout the program, and you have your stack that you execute on. Sometimes systems have registers and not stacks. It all depends on how they're built. Typically hardware stuff will have registers instead of stacks because they have specific pieces of hardware designed to store things. Also, you'll see in a full-fledged system another table for holding variables. We're not going to use any variables for this, so we're going to leave that complexity out of it. So now let's add 1 and 2. So first, we have our literal table that's filled in with a couple pieces of demo information. We have our empty stack, and we have our bytecode. We'll execute our first part of bytecode. That's push literal table item number 1 onto the stack. Second is push literal table item number 4 onto the stack. And then add doesn't take any sort of parameters because add is a built-in instruction that is understood that it takes 2 items off of the stack and puts the sum of those items back onto the stack. So when we execute add, we're left with just 3 on the stack. And then we execute print, and we get our nice little display. So now, bytecode normally when it's in the file, it won't be nice and spaced out like that. That's for people. It'll just be all running together. And so when you open up an executable file and you do it in like a hex editor, and you see all those individual lines, or all the hex codes, those are instructions. Granted, those are also going to be parts of the literal table and other things in there. But parts of those will be instructions. And so that's how, like when you're little and playing on the Nintendo, the Game Genie could go in and find these spots in the system and alter them. That's how you get that added bonus of infinity lives or anything like that.
And why you get weird glitches on some of the games.
Hmm?
Why you get weird glitches when you try it on some games.
Right, exactly. You start messing with the internal structure of things and unpredicted results happen. So PHP also uses an opcode system. It's not quite as terse, but it's still an opcode system, and so we can show you a little bit. If we do an echo 1 plus 2, and we break that down, you'll see that we actually have a couple opcodes here. One is that we have a statement, and that's that whole echo 1 plus 2. That's the statement. Then we have an add operation, which takes 2 values, the 1 and the 2, and returns, it's got that squiggly mark 0, and that in PHP land means it returns a variable. And then we have our echo, which takes the squiggly mark 0 as its operand, and it prints it out to the screen. And then every PHP file implicitly does a return at the end. And so you'll see in any sort of opcode breakdown that it ends with a return down at the bottom. Another example, if we use print instead of echo, you see that we actually have a little bit different setup. Print and echo are 2 different things. Print takes more work to do. We go a little bit more complex. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals A plus B, echo C. We have a lot more going on. But you can see that it's assigning the variables to the operand, and then we execute on those assignments, and then we echo the output. And this is just to like open the door to get you guys thinking about what the possibilities are, and kind of seeing the internals and a little bit underneath the hood of what's going on and just what you're doing every day.
Is this what's stored in APC?
Yes, this is what APC is caching, and that's all I had.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
All right, George, it's all you. Don't kick the camera.
Did I hit it?
Almost.
Okay. Odds are that I can. Okay, hello everyone.
Hello.
Today we're going to talk about intro to behavior-driven development with Behat. And feel free to ask questions at each.
We're having a slight technical issue.
Oh my gosh.
Do you want to try and?
No.
No, it's.
No. So
Let's try
we'll swap
popping
display
out
and
and
swap
popping in.
display.
There you go.
No, that's not quite right because now. Oh, that's weird. Okay, how we go? We'll get out of this. Exit show.
It may not agree with the weird resolution.
Yeah, the HDMI is coming in at 1024
Mm-hmm.
by 768. That's why it's coming awkward.
Oh. So we can do here.
So you can adjust it in your displays.
Do I need to adjust it to?
1024 by 768.
1024 by 768?
Yeah.
Well, what is it set at now?
16 something.
Let's see how this works.
Sweet.
There we go.
It's better? Okay.
Take 2.
Okay, and
Except when
cut.
Stop, man.
Denied.
That's okay. You should see what it looks like on the video.
Is there an engineer in the room?
This is
So go back to 16 by, what is it, 16 by 9 or 16 by 12? What's
1612, yeah.
No, that's 4 by 3. You should be looking at 16 by 9.
16 by 9. 900, okay.
Yeah.
So built in, oh, Sony 16 by 9, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, and make sure the other
No,
displays.
that's prop on the right.
Hmm. So
That's just
1612.
weird.
Click into arrangement. Unmirror the displays.
There we go. Wait, don't touch it. Don't touch it.
Yeah, unmirroring may help.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Got it.
Stick the. You should be able to. You can set up PowerPoint to.
You know, do 16 by 9. Yeah.
Is over here, this guy.
Why does this keep going back like that?
Try 1280 something.
Hold on a sec.
So have you guys worked with BDD before? No? Okay, functional tests, functional testing, unit testing, test-driven development? Yeah? Okay. Well,
Huh.
one thing I talk about, like, BDD is really nice for test-driven development too, especially when you're dealing with product, because then you give them something that you can prove too. One of the things we're going to talk about is how the contract is there. It's,
Hey,
use
that look
case
right?
based.
Yeah, that should work.
Yeah.
Looks like it's still prop on the right.
Oh, is
From the
it?
menu bar.
Probably is. I don't know. Oh, so there's a little cropped on the right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's.
That looks better though, right?
Yeah.
No, still missing.
It's
No,
missing some
it's-
parts, so it's a little. It is cropped for sure.
I think probably auto will be okay now that he's.
It is cropped by like a
On
fair
here.
amount. But yeah, auto might do it.
Now that you're on
I
your,
don't know.
should hopefully be okay.
And then try one of the other resolutions, like 1280 by 720.
Hit note for display.
Or that also.
Yeah.
See if that.
Well, sometimes that gets confused between whether or not it's the projector or this.
Where are you? Where's the rest of you? Okay, we're gonna assume that this kind of works, but we'll see what happens. Okay, let's see if this actually goes on. I think it's gonna be cropped again, but yeah, it's gonna be cropped again.
Hold on, don't do anything.
All right.
Now we'll go with this setting and change this.
That just stretches the pixels that's being sent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not bad. That was a hope. Yeah.
I could switch to the other. I could switch to. Well, that'll be a little bit difficult.
Do you have that not in mind? Do you have a PDA table?
Can we,
Yeah.
can you send your screen output to the?
We just do it full screen.
Yes.
Does this projector take VGA?
It does. We just need a adapter for the laptop.
Yeah, we got that already taken care of.
Yay! All right.
All right.
Now to figure out on the YouTube video how to slice all of that out.
Okay. Okay, thanks for being patient. So over the past year, Mashery took on behavior-driven development, BDD style functional testing with Behat for PHP. BDD style functional tests have gained popularity due to their descriptive nature. And in this presentation, we're going to talk about some of the concepts and give an introduction to it. We're going to go through some sample code, and we're going to talk about some lessons learned. So when we dive into each section, at the breaks, feel free to ask questions. If you have something that's confusing, feel free to ask questions too. This is definitely for your learning. The big problem that BDD solves is testing things at high value. The reason why is that unit tests cover all the process of all the isolated things with functionality. You get to about 80% of the code covered that way, or more. And functional tests can be expensive, and if you've dealt with functional testing before, they can be buggy, hard to maintain. And technically BDD is an extension of functional tests, so you will have certain of that bugginess too. That's why it's really important to add value to your functional tests so that you're covering things that wouldn't be covered in standard functional tests. If you've had experience with functional testing before and have looked at functional test code bases, people tend to be all over the place. And this really focuses your effort towards the goal of satisfying a use case. And within use case satisfaction, you get a guarantee over time. You get a guarantee in the initial implementation that you've done things right. You get confidence that as you do future development, that you haven't broken functionality, or that you can even know that functionality has changed and that your test has to be updated or your code has to be updated. Customers need to be informed, product needs to be informed. And that goes to this big benefit of real use cases. You get really high value out of it. And BDD can even be used as acceptance criteria for your product, for management, for customers.
What does acceptance criteria mean?
Acceptance criteria means, okay, I'm going to sell you a t-shirt, a shirt. And for this thing that I'm making called a shirt to be okay, it's going to cover your arms. That's an acceptance criteria. It's going to cover your chest. Another acceptance criteria is going to cover your back. The same thing with, say, the meetup group. An acceptance criteria for them, if they created their first groups, would be that people can register. Okay?
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And there's a certain amount of skepticality that, can come. And you really should be skeptical of any test framework or any framework that goes out there that you're going to use. I learned that skepticality really, and I don't know if that's a word, really, really helps you in understanding and really assigning value and defending something and throwing things away that are bad and accepting things that are good. And with functional tests, you can do all the same things that BDD does. But when you get, 40 developers in a room trying to work on the same code base, trying to fix bugs, and it's just focused on, well, does this drop-down work? You're not really adding value to your functional test. You're not focusing in on the use case. And that's where we get back to focusing. The focusing does add the value. That focused effort allows you to do great things where if you were all over the place, that wouldn't happen. Okay, any questions or?
Well, why are functional tests more all over the place? I guess you're going to get into that?
Well, a lot, yeah, no, not really, but I'm going to talk about it now.
Okay.
Because functional tests can be all over the place, because say you have a lot of bug fixes, for example, like this drop-down doesn't work. Well, let's add some test coverage for it. I write a functional test to make sure the drop-down works. That's fairly costly because you have to spin up a web server, make a HTTP request, get down all the resources, check the little drop-down, check my test passes. What you can do now, there are a lot of unit test frameworks that can do the exact same thing, that don't require the data, and you can verify that drop-down works and get the same benefit that you would from a equivalent functional test. And some functional tests do walk through scenarios as far as sign up and registration, and those tend to be like use cases that I have users that can sign up, and those are of value, as opposed to, yay, the page loads. Like, okay, well, that can be kind of nice too, but then there's a certain part of it, like, again, does the drop down render? Does when I click on this, does the right transition happen? When I have this data in JavaScript, can I trigger this type of JavaScript event? All that can be isolated when you define the borders of trust, like the interface. Like JavaScript really knows, say, that there's some data coming in and there's some UI presentation. Those are two borders of trust, but within that you're just in JavaScript. And in PHP you're on the server before you go out to the network, and after you come from the network, that's kind of a border of trust where the data is crossing in. You know that you're within this contained environment, within a process where you've isolated and can run things fairly quickly and get a result. So you can do a lot with just unit testing for just like, did I dot my T's and cross my I's? Well, dot my I's and cross my T's as a programmer.
So maybe another way of saying that is saying that functional tests are a very slow, expensive way for testing something like that doesn't have a lot of value. Yeah. Said it quicker.
Okay. But yes, that's exactly it. With unit tests also, you get code coverage, which is nice to report as developers, that you know that your code has been tested. You're like saying that I know how this works. You have known behavior. Okay, so we're going to talk about some concepts of how BDD works. This is not just for Behat. So this is the Gherkin language, which is really, it's a plain old English type language which the feature file is based on. Test components are composed of feature files which contain scenarios and tags and hooks to achieve the goal of validating the use case. So let's go into feature files. It's going to be the foundation of everything. This is an interesting quote I found. I think the real difference between the mid-level and pro-level Behat developer user is the understanding of roles and their place and feature. And that to me kind of gets to one big point, that the feature file is really about establishing a baseline for the philosophy of the use case within the test. And yeah, it's basically in defining satisfaction. This is a quick simple example of a feature file. It establishes the benefit, in order to do something, and the beneficiary as a person, place, thing, or whatever. I need to be able to achieve some goal. And those are the fundamental components. The scenarios which follow really detail the evidence of that you satisfied this use case. Kind of think of, I listened to a presentation the other day, and they're talking about how the in order to and the as and the I need to of a use case and what those mean, and how kind of generic and mundane those are. But those generic and mundane components, you could honestly put on a 3x5 card, and if you filled out a little bit under it, you'd have a ton of different use cases. And this really benefits you in that you have a fundamental understanding of this is a use case, and it's not executed. That part is not executed, but it's really the fundamental part of the feature file. It gets you to the common understanding of what scenarios will be proven here. Let's talk about scenarios and how to write them. So, as we saw, the scenario was composed of some requirements, situation, followed by actions to generate a verifiable outcome. Multiple givens, whens and thens are joined with conjunctions and or but. And it is important to, within the flow of the scenario, to keep them in order. You won't be held fast to that programmatically. It won't say, oh, your givens aren't before your whens or your thens. But what scientific method would make sense if it didn't have, given a certain set of situations, I do something and then I get a result, right? It's like how you make salt.
It also makes your output look really screwy.
Yeah.
When you run the tool, like it'll put the steps in order and show what's happening. So you're change them all around.
Yeah. Like exactly. For example, if you read this and moved all those around and juggled your givens, whens, and then that would make absolutely no sense, right? But you still get the same outcome because it's not held fast by annotations. The annotations kind of use as a reference. It's more poor form than anything else. But you really should keep it. We're going to talk about kind of how this comes together. This is just a sample which we'll go through in the demo. And this has this is really actually a workable one, which runs, gives a verifiable result.
Are the at directives actually part of Gherkin or Behat or whatever?
Yes.
Okay.
Those at directives, I'll talk about more, but it's kind of like an unspoken part of the use case. For example, for I can join the group, it's required that you know of a member, and you just want to load that in somehow, but it's something that if you read the use case, like a person would be like, duh, right? But a computer wouldn't.
Like type hints.
Right, exactly. It's type hints. And certain things, we require those, right? It helps. And to connect the step to a PHP class, we use annotations within our code. And even though it says given, as the regular expression in the PHP class, that can be interchanged. I've seen it moved around. But when you output your documentation, that gets into the whole poor form thing. It looks squirrely. You can't really understand what's going on if you just start interchanging them willy-nilly. And you put those steps into a class that extends the raw make context. So these step definitions form a library for say authentication in this case. And in this example, I extended the class which I created called the abstract context, so I could add additional functionality that helps me out, such as wait for the page to load, because Selenium will continue on doing its thing regardless of whether components are there or not. So you need to add certain helpers for your situation, for your application, that may be common for all tests. So you're going to start extending things. You're a programmer. You're going to do good programmer stuff, right? Or somebody who is a programmer who's writing this will. And we want to write reusable steps. We don't want those step definitions to be, in essence, spaghetti code, because we all know spaghetti code is bad, right? And these are some rules I find very useful when creating steps, that they must be in the present tense, because when you're executing it, you're testing it right now. Regardless of who's doing it, it's happening right now. So you want to say things such as, I clicked the sign up link. You don't want to say things such as, I should be waiting for an email to arrive. You know, a tree falls in the woods. It makes absolutely no sense. It has nothing to do with the use case. It's not relevant to what's happening right now. And you want to write things from the perspective of the end user, the entity person or person identified by as a blank, as a SFPHP meetup attendee, for example. I fill out the contact us form. Okay, this user is typing away. You don't want to say things such as the browser navigates to, unless your actor is the browser in that case. But it's still, it's not as reusable. I probably would never use the browser navigates to. That just sounds really weird. And they must use durable content locators. When you're composing your feature file and things move around as they do with web design or any user interface design, you want to ideally have the feature file not change. You want to have it such that your step definitions change more frequently. So you want to try and ensure that durability. Say if you're looking for an email field, a field labeled email, you might want to say email, because that's on the page if that's going to be what you consider static. And I was at a previous company where we, specifically for our functional test, where we created specific IDs targeted for unit testing or for functional testing. So if you have a contractor saying this is going to be durable, you should use that too. It's less readable from the feature file perspective, and that's kind of bad because it's supposed to be a human readable document, but it could be possible, especially in the case where you're testing XML and your end user may be as a iPhone. I need to be able to find this DOM selector, right? You don't want to do something like the fourth div within a div within a div. All that takes is something really tiny just to destroy it. You wrote something really brittle. And actions must be straightforward. What I initially thought here was that we wanted single actions and kind of atomic things. And it still is kind of atomic. You want some things that are small or big, but something you can encapsulate like a method, something that is of single purpose, such as good programming, such as when you're writing a method. Yeah. Such as I fill in the new customer information form. Or if it's really applicable, I fill in the username field with John Doe. That may be applicable to your situation. You have to use a lot of judgment. But you don't want things like I click a random button or something. Now with step definitions, it's important to have these things be discoverable as well. And you can do that from the CLI. Behat DL does a simple list. Behat DI does an extended information list. And it also takes, if you're commenting your step definitions, it also takes the first line of your dot comment, which is kind of cool because you can get a little description in there, which really helps whoever comes next after whoever, or you join in and say like, what in the world does this step do? I don't understand it. And a big part of after we know how to create steps, as we saw, like what were these tags, we're going to have to fill in the gaps. Because the use case does not define setup, tear down, or other implied prerequisites. And we get to those with tags and hooks. Hooks occur a little bit more behind the scene, but we'll get into that later. That's more on the level of the step definition when the code. Tags are more visible to the end user and to the right of the feature file. Tag can be added to feature files to add logic to test execution dynamically. You can do Boolean logic with them. You control which features are executed, not executed, what scenarios are executed, not executed, what hooks run, and even how some hooks run. Oops, that click didn't work. That's a better click. All right. So this is a configuration file. This is in our test. This is a view of our Behat YAML file. And for example, I have a tag to do, and this tilde means not. So it's going to filter out and skip all scenarios or features with the to do tag, which is kind of nice when you have get some product requirements that you haven't implemented yet, or you have established your requirements you haven't implemented yet. You don't want to break, for instance, continuous integration, which would be either automation, or break other tests that people are executing, so they wonder, hey, what's happening? Allows you to develop fast. And here's some more of the logic. You have logical or, you have logical and. You also have not, as we mentioned. You can do cool things where you're even running them on the command line. And the -- tags argument is a command line argument. You can say, I want to run mine or yours. So I'll run all those tests with tagged with mine or yours. Or I want to run only the tests that are tagged mine and yours. Or I want to run the tags that are the step scenarios that are tagged mine, but not the ones that are production only. It's kind of cool. And we have hooks. Let's really fill in the last little bit. So hooks execute when milestones are reached within the program's execution. Try to illustrate it here, but your before scenario hooks, for suite hooks, pardon me, will run before the suite. And then you get into your set of features. And you have your before feature hooks that'll run before each feature, and then the ones that will run after each feature. And then within the feature there are the scenarios, and you have your hooks that will run before each scenario and after each scenario. And then with steps, you have those hooks which will run before each step and after each step. And you're back out to the end of the suite, which things will run after the end of the suite too. And how you add these hooks, they become annotations within your step definition, within your code for your step definition file, where you'll create methods that are annotated with a before suite or after suite in this case. And they will pass in as an argument suite event. It's a static, and you can do some things there for high level setup for the global suite. And before features and after feature is another hook. You can do some, setup before the feature, and you get passed in feature event class. Before scenario, for every specific scenario ones, which the before and after scenario I find, yes?
So that requires member or whatever was a before feature hook for the
add symbol?
No.
the media.
Or is that tag?
Actually, require member, I put it at the feature level, but it's a scenario hook. So it says what tags are present at that time within the YAML file. Think it's kind of like the Gherkin, the feature file is kind of like a YAML file. It's hierarchical. The feature, you have the feature defined, you have each scenario defined. You can put tags at those various levels, but those tags will still be available for the scenario. So if I required member, I created as a before scenario hook, but I put it at the feature level because I want it to be available for each scenario to go through that tag. I could also have done a require member feature hook. I just
the
did
level
it.
that you put it at in the file doesn't define the level that you have to define it at in code?
Exactly. It's just, is it available at that point? Right? And again, the argument is a base scenario event. There are step hooks as well, which run before each step or after each step and have their own event. I think the step event also comes with access to, the deeper you get, the more information you get. The specific, for say, the step one, you get tags, you get the exact prose of the step that's being run, where you can compare it to regular expressions and things like that. So you get more fine information depending on what level you're descending into. And the logic for hooks is similar to the logic. Well, the tag logic for hooks is similar to the tag logic for the command line, except you don't have not. It's kind of a bummer.
What's the difference between comma and don't like?
Nothing.
They're both the same.
Both or.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no difference. Now, as I mentioned, if you heard when I say the hooks run each time, yeah, they run each and every time, which can be expensive. So that's why you really, really want to leverage your tags in there, which we at Mashery did learn the hard way. That it can be really expensive. We had, within a lot of we had no tags, and we had functions saying, if this situation, then execute it. If not, don't. So on the call stack, you pop on, or you push on the method, then you push on the if statement, then you say, no, I'm not going to do anything. You pop it off, and you pop off the function. And doing that, when you have hundreds of scenarios, is really expensive, and you have a dozen, 50 hooks or something like that. It becomes really expensive. And it becomes uber expensive when you go from a suite hook to a step hook, because every single step, regardless of whether the previous step passed or failed, will trigger that hook. It's nasty. Okay, so let's try and the code walkthrough. Let's see how.
I remember your screen down here.
Oh yeah, no, my screen's down here. Oh, I can't get a mirror it now. Big money, no whammies. Booyah. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna maximize this.
Wiggle the back.
Ooh.
If we expose by other, can we turn the lights off, those two lights off?
Let me try this. Ooh. I'm guessing this is our adapter. Sorry about that.
Projector may just be dying.
What?
Projector.
Okay.
It looks good on my screen.
Let me do this. Just gonna make this.
Can we turn those two lights off? That might help a bit.
Yeah. Oh, this is.
Right next to you, Jim. I think.
No, that's
Oh.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little hard given the lights. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is also on GitHub too. So what we have here is a feature file, and we created 3 feature files. Start at the very beginning with the configuration first. So I established a configuration where my oh yeah, gosh. So I established a configuration where the feature files will be located underneath the test directory and features. And Bootstrap, which ultimately is where the main step definitions are added, will be located in a file feature context, which is the default file name, underneath test Bootstrap. I just added that as kind of my root for my namespace.
So that works like a PHP unit bootstrap file, like loads your autoloader. And
Yeah, exactly. My autoloader and everything. Selenium 2, and I'm using this this not to do tag, which is, for example, is this one where if I file log and I log in with Facebook, right? And in this feature context,
Zoom, please.
yes.
Thank you.
Try to make it big enough, but in this feature context, you have a bunch of includes. This can be generated, with the exception of this part right here, by calling Behat -- init, and it'll put it wherever it says in your Behat YAML file where you're initially going to get started. So that's a good way to get started when you're creating a new Behat code base. And I added this thing called Mink context, which is a library that came with it with a bunch of different step definitions that are useful. So I'm going to leverage these a lot because it gives me a lot of the page locators that I'll need to use. And then I created a module for authentication and one for the group's homepage. And if I deleted this, it would never find this file. That's a common error we've gone through a lot at Mashery. Can't tell you how many times I've done it. I can't tell you how many times I've helped other people who have done it before. Where they're like, the statement is, help, I can't find my step, when I run my feature file, I can't find my step definition, but I define it in this class I just created. Keyword, just created. Okay, did you add it to your context? Well, I guess it's there. Yeah, I created the file, but is it in this file? No. So now I look in the file and I'm like, oh, it's not there.
So this is because it looks like it's using dependency injection.
Yes.
So basically, when you're saying that they can't find it, they're talking about in further functions they can't do like this arrow group home, arrow whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So what this will do initially, it'll go through here, it'll scan all the annotations by reflection or introspection, whatever, and say like, okay, now I know that there are these step definitions exist. Now I know about all these hooks. That becomes really useful because, like you'll see here, there are all the stuff is here, right? We haven't experimented with logic within this constructor. I'm pretty sure there might be a way to, if we ever wanted to do some things tricky, but it's beyond, I think, the scope of this class. Yeah, it's way beyond the scope of this talk.
Could you create sort of like an abstract, another like a intermediate subclass for that's like a base Behat or base feature context, so that when you do the construct, if you need certain ones that are used across all of your other ones, then you do parent constructs.
Yep.
Okay.
And what I did was I created one from the raw make context, abstract context, that I used to extend for the authentication in group. This is kind of taken from the code that we use at Mashery, where we have a lot of wait for this, wait for that. And it becomes really, really helpful because you need that pretty much on every single web interaction. Yeah.
Ajax and DOM
Hey,
stuff.
right. I mean, it's the internet. You wait. it's not instantaneous, right? Although we like to tell people it's instantaneous, but that's a little lie, right? And then, for example, the I am signed in, that goes to the authentication where it says I am signed in. And I created some different whens and thens so it made sense, where the given is just that state of being, where you're just saying this is a fact, this is how things are right now. And the when is phrased as an action. So that so you're actually doing something.
So the same method is called in both instances? If
Yeah.
used as a given or a len?
Yeah, same method is called. Just.
Did you manually add that as the second annotation, or was that part of the generation from the feature file?
I manually added it.
Okay.
If you create a feature file and you don't have your step definition defined, it will output a code snippet saying this, and it'll have pending exception, and you can copy and paste that into wherever you want to put it.
Right.
And use it later. But these I manually created.
So those are basically two aliases to use I am not signed in.
Right. And when I initially was generated, it looked like, I'll have to undo. It looks something like this if we just generate it, right? It would say literally generate a function saying I am not signed in because you wrote I am not signed in. And I did a little stuff to pretty up that from what it gave me based on my feature file with my pending exception and built upon it. I did too much.
So that's a pro tip for being able to reuse code in different parts of this, different steps.
Exactly. It becomes really helpful. And then even I decided that, if you remember from the feature context, I defined this thing make. So I wanted to use the make functions. So I grabbed the main context, which was this feature context, and then from there I got the subcontext of make. And then I used make's visit method, which is also I visit. If I clicked on this, it'd take us to it. It's basically, whenever you have a step saying I am on or I go to, right? Look, they're following the same convention. So it's a way to leverage steps in other code bases that you import in.
So Behat is basically just like a blank slate tool, and Mink is a bunch of pre-written steps for browsers?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Behat is a blank tool, and Mink is a bunch of pre-written steps for browsers, which makes it really nice. And I had a talk with somebody who was thinking about BDD for iOS devices and Android devices. And BDD frameworks exist in Java. I'm not sure if they exist in Objective-C. They exist in Scala, they exist in Ruby.
There's people that use Gherkin for unit tests.
Yeah. There's a JavaScript one too.
So from your practice, what kind of overhead it adds for developers to maintain these tests as product development?
It depends on how complex your product is.
Yeah, and it depends on how
Depends
quickly
on
your
how
requirements change too.
Yes.
Yeah. This is exactly what I'm kind of thinking of. If your product is changing as you move from release to release, so it might create
Well-
significant effort to maintain the
Yeah,
tests.
I mean, well, how it would be the same thing if you just had functional tests in general.
But then again, doing this kind of thing gives you a concrete, like, what you're going for. You're not like, what was it? Trying to remember. It actually
Right.
gives you a
And
point
more
of
than
reference.
likely, that
Right.
maintenance is going to cost less than the time of manually testing everything.
Right, and if
you
some,
want to test.
exactly, and when the BDD test breaks, you still have the use case as he was going to, and you say like, okay, did we do away with this use case, or do I need to change stuff to verify I still satisfy this use case? It boils down to did I ruin the experience for a user or two, or all my users? Yes.
I have a couple of questions. So, was this file that we're looking at auto-generated?
No, this file was not auto-generated. I just created a class, and as I went, I added things.
Okay, so you were first writing something in like a YAML that looked like just like the same structure with like.
Oh, oh yeah, talking about this one,
Yeah,
right?
and
Well,
then-
this is the feature file. This is your use case,
Okay.
and it doesn't necessarily. It uses that dictionary. This really defines the language of the test.
So this gets parsed and executed.
Right. This gets parsed.
Okay.
It'll counter, I am not signed in. It'll say, okay, let's see. I got all these contexts here. I'll go through all of these, and oh yeah, I know where that comes from. It comes from something matching this regular expression, which matches I am not signed in. Okay, great. Then I'll run this function.
Okay, so that higher level YAML style Gherkin language
Right.
depends on this PHP being written, and then it uses it.
Exactly.
So then, once you've fleshed out your library of actual PHP code that reflects the phrasing that you use in your feature files, then what ends up happening is when you run Behat, or when you need to write a new feature, if it's not introducing any new functionality, but it's just reusing stuff in a different order, then you don't have to write any more PHP code. You can just write a feature file, and it will, when you run Behat against it, it will have all the stuff already made. It has the library already behind it.
Exactly.
Okay,
Like,
that's fancy.
for example, this line next to it, I am on, in quotes, some URL. Okay, where does that come from? Go through here. Oh, okay, I found it in Minx. Let's see. Am on, quote. Okay, I am on this. Okay, that I matched this regular expression here. Oops, it's not big enough. I matched this regular expression here. I am on some, if you know regular expressions, you know this is just some big capture that'll name it. Okay, then I'll use call visit.
And so anything in quotes gets turned into a function argument?
Yeah, well, anything in a capture,
Oh, okay.
right? This just happens to be a named capture.
Got it.
Even if they did it just as an unnamed one, it would still work. Just regular expressions, right?
And what happens if you implemented specifications but forgot to define some step?
Pardon? I couldn't.
What happens if you just forgot to implement some step on PHP?
If I fail to implement it?
If you forgot to implement this step,
Okay.
you have some defined in this
So
Gherkin language.
if I forgot to implement this step, if I forgot to implement a step, what would happen to it is that it would output an exception.
Okay.
It would say this thing is not implemented. It would typically give you a code snippet saying, take this snippet, put it in some file, and it'll throw a pending exception now. And then you can implement it when you get to it. And it's like, okay, great, you gave me a little snippet of code. Like for example, let's run through it really quickly, okay?
Yeah, just one more question quickly. Do you have any special place for keep testing data or fixtures?
Okay. I'm sorry.
Do you have some place to keep testing data or fixtures?
Data.
Data
Data.
fixtures.
Fixtures.
Not in this code, but there is a way. You're saying as far as I want to have a list of data that I want to run through.
Yeah.
You can do that in Behat. Yeah. I didn't cover it here because I didn't. That's a whole nother ball of wax.
Okay,
There.
yeah.
That's the hat 201.
Yeah, that's 201.
You can tell Behat to pull in a file, or you can define like a table structure in the YAML, and it can iterate through those, or
Right.
what have you. There's different ways to do it depending
And you
on
can
size.
Right, you can define a scenario template and a table of data, and it will permutate that template of the scenario for slight changes for every permutation. You can say, I'm doing something like you have a role-based system, where as you're running through the scenario as a developer, you establish that this user is a developer, I establish this user as an administrator, I establish this user is authenticated, unknown, right? And if you, again, like this is a situation where,
Can you zoom that in?
Well, the contrast is kind of.
oh, the contrast
Still
is
might-
terrible. Okay.
Yeah, he switches to theme.
Yes. What do I usually use? This is the one I usually use.
Basic would be good.
Maybe basic should be
dark
good.
dark on light, or dark on light.
Dark on light.
Yeah,
Yeah,
basic.
so basic.
So basic.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
And then zoom. Zoom. Much better.
Okay. That good?
Yes.
Maybe a little plus one. So here's an example of what happened when we had one that wasn't defined. It outputted one undefined and said, okay, I should be able to leave the group, throw a pending exception. Right? So you could take this and throw it into the code somewhere. Right? I should be able to. Oh, yeah, because it changed its name here, right? So here's an error where somebody like me changed the this whole the current group that they are viewing, right? So here's something where I per se change this. So you'd be able to just have to define this, and in this situation, this is undefined, right? So to define it, you'd copy in that you'd paste in this whole function and then start implementing it. And that implementation ultimately would come out to be like this, where in this case, to correct a mistake that I made, it would look like that, right? And then when you run through it, which we're going to run through it all. So I can just annotate and we can talk about this and keep things moving.
Okay, that was my next question.
Okay. So now we're running through it where it's logging in, it's doing some things. And I'll have some output. Hopefully it will color itself blue again, or maybe it won't, or I'll have a pipe on the side where I have debug code in my hooks to show that how we're getting data. And this is based on the required members tag that we loaded the configuration to log in as sfphptester@gmail.com, which is defined in a YAML file which I created just for using for storing data.
Which should be the fixture.
Which would be a fixture. Yeah. And this is fixture from the perspective of this is fixture data that is not a part of the use case. So this is fixture data for stuff that we need behind the scenes to do our job, right? So I'll show you the sample for that and kind of how that worked.
Is this running Selenium?
It's running Selenium.
How hard is that to set up?
I'll show you. There's a setup.sh script I have that basically downloads it and runs it, creates a PID file. And it downloads a lot of other stuff for this too. It's really, really simple to set up.
But you normally do that on a server somewhere?
No.
No? You
No.
do all your tests right on your...
Yeah. Well,
So, like,
not all.
You're just
We
using
do
the
as
browser,
individuals.
So it doesn't matter where the browser session's coming from.
Well,
it's just
I know,
hitting the
but
same
like
path.
maybe if you wanted to have this as some sort of like.
Well,
for
let me
CI
finish.
environments-
We do this as our individually on our own computers, but we do have integration
Yeah.
with something from this company, Sauce Labs,
Yeah.
where they have a whole farm of like powerful servers, splitting up our tests, running Selenium, doing everything we did here, right? And if you go to if you look on the PHP meetup site, you'll see a link to the GitHub that has this project. So if you want to play with it a little bit. And this is the setup file I had, which the getting of Selenium is as simple as, this is how I download Selenium, simple curl. And this is how I start Selenium, running Java with an argument. That's it.
So, could you have like an AWS server? Would it be pretty easy to set up your AWS, integrate your own integration server, or why did you guys choose to use Sauce Labs? Just because it goes faster, or was it a pain in the butt?
Sauce Labs will help you scale faster.
Yeah. Like that's, like, I don't know, yeah, he really knows that more than I do. Like Sauce Labs, that'll help us scale faster. We can
It's
talk
probably
about,
not reasonably expensive. I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I think that's like the Sauce Labs stuff. Maybe we can talk about that more after.
Okay.
It's
Let's
kind of
sidebar.
Okay.
yeah. And my configuration, I created in a YAML file like this, so I could get that registered user hierarchically like this, and you'd fill in the password with whoever user you have that you know of, and I added it to the group via, no, I didn't add it to the group, I added it to authentication. Hopefully you can see this, via one of the hooks. This hook right here, where I find the configuration file. I'm not going to open that file and just show you the sample so you get my username and password. And I parsed it. This is something that comes from one of the Symfony inclusions. And then after I parsed it, I was able to just extract those variables. And the reason to use this, I felt, was that I could get radically different behavior with very minimum change by saying required member, required non-member, required block user. So I could get totally different test results by doing that. Now I have a data store of information. Okay? I'm going to get back to any questions about this before I get back to the presentation more?
Was
I want to
there
go
a way
lessons
to
learned.
run it like once as each of those different cases?
Yeah.
Would you run through the same scenarios?
Like for example, I could
I guess you would have different.
pick one of these out easily. Like I could say, here's the one where I can join the group. I can copy this guy, right? And I can run bin Behat and paste that in with the line number right there. That's line number 8, which you can't really see right now. I'll hit return. Now you can see it. And it'll run just that scenario from that feature file, or I could run that whole feature file. Or I could run only ones that, like I said, that required member, right? So you can run things within a specific directory. So the directory hierarchy and when you structure your feature files is important too. And for us at Mashery, we decided to do that close to product requirements. And we decided to organize our step definitions within the UI hierarchy. Because that kind of made sense. We're dealing with the user interface, so why not do our step definitions like that based on the user interface? So when I'm looking at the users module, all my step definitions for the users module are in one file. Because I'm going to have to leverage them anyways to do stuff. So we ran this one, we got an outcome, right? And you also see not just the line number from the feature file. When you start calling steps, it gets into the namespace and the method for each of these. So you kind of gives you a correlation back and forth so you can help debug your code. Oh, and debugging your code. The -- verbose argument is your friend. When something fails and you don't have the verbose argument, you get nothing.
This is the verbose argument of the Behat.
Yeah, you put
Behat.
you do like -- verbose.
Got it.
This really helps. When we first got started and we didn't know about this, we were in a lot of trouble.
So, as you're building a new feature, do you write your feature files before you actually put any code, before you start writing any code to build this feature, or do you build the feature first and then write the feature files to test it against it once it's done? Which comes first?
Okay.
Does that make
TDD would say you write the feature files first. Well, even really for some stuff, we had product wrote the feature files first, and then we tweaked them to make it towards what we were going to implement or how we implemented it. But ideally, if you know the use case, you can create the feature files first, and then implement your code, and then implement your feature files. Tweak them and implement your step definitions to support them as needed.
Right, the feature file tells you how you expect it to work.
Yeah.
So, if let's say I was starting a brand new thing, like there's zero code written for it, if I wrote the feature files for the initial stuff that I know is going to work, or how I need it to work, and then I run the Behat against it, and it outputs all the code snippets, and then I drop those all in PHP files, and then I start going and building the actual feature, and then I start writing the test code against it. Would that be the way to do it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. That does.
Okay.
It does. It's not a bad way at all. Okay, so don't know how much time we have left.
Depends on how much more people want to listen.
Okay, so I'm gonna go
All
through
the
these
information.
lessons learned real quick. This is basically a couple things on how we at Mashery ran into walls, tripped over ourselves and fumbled, so that you won't do those things too. And hopefully we'll remember these so we won't do them again. So with regard to feature files, the descriptive feature file narratives embody the use case. Even though this doesn't get executed as any code, it's probably the most meaningful part of the feature file. Otherwise, where do your scenarios go? Again, your scenarios are going all over the place. You have this use case. You establish a really good use case. Now you can write scenarios that help push that use case in direction of proof. Whereas if you just say, you don't put anything there, you're back to just doing functional tests. Maybe focused a little bit, but not towards a common goal. There's this thing called background, which is it's like an initialization common code. So if you have a background section within your feature file, it will execute before each scenario, such that, say in this case, I'm not signed in, I'm on the SF PHP meetup group page. Great, you're going to need to do that before you file join us and get an outcome, or you're going to want to be there before you file a login. So
that basically runs before every scenario.
Yeah. So then you have it again. You have reusable code. You don't have to, if something changes, you don't have to rewrite that however many scenarios you have in that file.
When would you use this versus a pre-scenario hook?
It's part of the use case. It's a really important component of the use case. Like the scenario hooks, I think are kind of the unspoken parts, the setup and tear down, the implied.
But for this, it's more like this is a necessity. This is
right.
You don't want to explicitly say that.
Right. You want to explicitly say
it's important to the story.
Right. Yeah. Best way to say it's important to the story. each step should be written very descriptively. I should see upcoming and past events. I think even better, which I kind of wanted to do, is I should see upcoming and past events for the group, because you're on the group's page. And maybe seeing upcoming and past events is good enough because that UI is used, that snippet of the UI is used in different places other than just the group. So you have to find that right level of descriptiveness. But it definitely has to be descriptive. I should see events may not be meaningful because you may have events presented in a bunch of different ways where the person using the step would not know what to do. They may end up refactoring your step definition out of usability for other steps that are using it. Right? Execution speed will vary. You gotta wait for things to be ready before you can act upon them. For example, of this poor penguin. If he had waited and looked to make sure that he would jump into the water, he might have lived to see another day. And here's some lessons learned for step definition hooks in the PHP code. Yeah, again, reusability. Reusability is probably the hardest part I have found about creating step definitions and steps. You really have to do, again, that right level of complexity. Really focus in on not just I'm walking the dog through a test, like yada yada. I just have to get from here to there. Everything's cool. This is not really production code. This is really production code. It's important. It's very important. Some may argue is more important than the code you wrote for your customers, because this is verifying that you're satisfying the contractual need to your customers. For so many bugs that exist on any website, we'll say, oh, this is broken, this is terrible. But I know of a workaround. We'll communicate that. This is so you don't have to have that conversation. So you don't have to do that work. You don't have to burn that cash. So you should invest in it and treat it like you treat the rest of your code. And again, time is money. Use an API when UI interactions are not required. An API may take up to 300 milliseconds, where a single page load may take up to 6 seconds. And to do that same step may take multiple page loads. You could create some entity by one API call, get information on an entity by one API call. But how many web page interactions do you have to do to get that same information? How much code do you have to write to turn that information you extracted from the web page into some structured data? If possible, it's just not worth it. You want to leverage API as much as possible. Yes?
Time's especially money if you're paying your cloud provider to do this for you.
Yes, time's especially money if you're paying a cloud provider to do this for you.
Actually, not so much when you pay unlimited.
But
So
Time is
Well,
money
time-
waiting for your developers, waiting for the test.
unless you like getting coffee a lot when you're running your tests. If you like getting coffee a lot, do it all for the UI.
So now we can do, why aren't you working? Because I'm running functional tests.
I'm running functional tests. Right. We are now back to punch cards. Right?
Fair enough.
So, wait, I don't understand, I understand what doing it through the UI is, right? Loading your code in Selenium and like filling, what is concretely, what's the difference between using the UI and an API? Can you give a concrete example?
Okay. That's a good. Go ahead.
Okay. There would be certain things you can test, like if you just want to test a server response, then it doesn't really matter. You could fudge a post to a server And or you just programmatically do a post to a server and see what the response is. And if it's a 200, then good to go. If it's a 500, then
Okay.
obviously something wrong.
Okay.
Basically, when the interaction is incidental, like say you need a user with a specific set of permissions, use the API to create that user and get that user ready, and then
Okay.
use it for that task.
Like, so if you use Flickr, like I use Flickr a lot, so I need to know 10 photos in this photo set. I could go through the UI and log into Flickr, get to that account, get to that set, scroll through 10 photos and extract what I could, or I could do an API call to the search to the set's endpoint and get those.
Unless the UI is what you're testing, then don't use the UI.
Right, exactly. Right.
Okay.
Right.
System under test theory.
System under test theory. And limit hook execution using tags. I can't go through this that warning slide I had and how I said it executes every time enough.
So what is an example of this if you weren't using tags? Like if you weren't like what would this code look like if you weren't limiting hooks?
Oh god, I could check out our code base and probably like
Well,
it would look like this code would look like you take away the require member and maybe you'd have if something else and is in here, then look for, then do it if not. Like you may have a step that called that said and I have a member per se, and this whole function would go away, and then because you say I have a member, it'll load it somewhere else and do it. Or you may have certain things where, say you're doing some features you care about metrics, and you're just collecting all those metrics regardless of whether you're going to use them at the end or not. And so you care about scenario execution speed, you're doing performance testing. And if I should be able to get my users to sign up by clicking through stuff, if they click through as quickly as possible, it should happen in 10 seconds, right? And you're tallying that for every single thing, not just the authentication. You're tallying it for everything that happened in the website. Well, everything that happened in your whole test suite. That would be bad and expensive. Or you have some condition that you set, like you created some data, you stored it away in some array, and you're going to clean it up later, and you have an after scenario hook that looks at this array and this one object every time, regardless of whether you use that step definition library or not, to iterate through that array to delete everything. That's when things get ugly. Because you have this whole thing onto the call stack and off the call stack to do absolutely nothing.
So that function, before scenario for required member, if you didn't have the two tags in front of it, would run.
No.
Well, one's a hook,
No.
one's a tag.
If I didn't have the latter tag, the hook tag, the before scenario tag,
Okay.
this function would never be called as a hook if it didn't have this before scenario tag.
Okay, I see.
If it didn't have this required membership tag, it would run before every scenario.
Got it.
But in this case, it's only running before any scenario that has required member.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
And this gets really ugly if this was a before step.
Yeah.
Right?
It doesn't seem like, I mean, I trust you, but it doesn't seem like running like a little conditional PHP statement would be so slow.
Run it across 300 scenarios over your whole suite, and it adds up.
If one of those hooks
Has
involves
IO.
well, not even IO, if it involves like making API calls and going to the website or whatever.
It has to have
involving
IO.
disk or network.
Yeah.
If you do that a couple hundred times, it'll still.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you have an n number of hooks too, right? So then it goes n by n.
Right, okay.
That sounds slightly different than what they're talking about, because you're saying that like the other way to do this is like as soon as you enter into the before scenario for required number method, is that you have a if like has tag like, or if has this condition,
Yeah.
then continue, otherwise exit. Right?
And even that, if it has condition, that's
Right.
that's expensive.
That's what you're saying is expensive, and that's why adding this required member,
Yeah.
which like
Seems like
weird,
it shouldn't
but
be that expensive just to run a conditional statement.
It's not. In the small scale, it's not that expensive, but it gets to be expensive
either way.
over time.
Don't
Get the
run
death by a
Germany
thousand
one.
cuts issue.
Yeah, it does really become death by a thousand cuts in a nutshell.
That and sharing data between scenarios and back to hooks and stuff is its own special thing on top of it. So
Right.
Memory and passing data in the memory a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's somebody who I think said, "Oh, we did this and we got 30 minutes back." You don't know this guy's name's Mitch. He was like, I heard him saying, "Yeah, we added these tags to our hooks and now we got 30 minutes back of execution time on our test." Right? And keep in mind, our test took about like what, a day, or at the time if you just ran them on your laptop.
as far as I know, they take about 9 or 10 hours.
Yeah. So that's why you need things like sauce labs and continuous integration environments where you're doing things in parallel on really big, really powerful servers. Right? And that's why functional tests, you want to make sure they are of high value. Because if you're doing this on little useless things that you could do with a unit test, you should do it with a unit test. Right? And another problem we've always had is making sure your environment is a proper state before execution. That gets into your whole setup and tear down, and not just setup and tear down, the verification of state when you start. Like if your state is wrong, you should either throw some kind of exception and just say get out of there, or you should, if it's light, fix it.
So would that be like a browser's already logged in somehow?
Yeah, exactly. Like one of those things I had, the tag, and the user user is not logged in. So before every scenario and after the scenario, I did it so it would log them out. So it go to in the case of Meetup, you just go to this URL, kills the session. For something like Mashery, we did a little bit more secure thing where it's a post, and it's a little more tricky, but that makes for the later execution of things really easy. You know, you say I'm logged in, I do this, I do that, I do this, and I'm done. Yay! Then I satisfy the use case. The next thing may require being logged out, and you don't know. You kind of got to clean up after yourself.
Yeah, the next thing could be, I wait till I see a sign-in link. And if you're already signed in, you're going to be waiting there for
Right.
as long as the time that will go
Right.
before.
And then lo and behold, all your later tests that start to fail.
Yeah.
Not like we at Mashery have seen that before. Okay.
Cascading fails today.
So, right. And that's all, folks. In a nutshell, Mashery is hiring. We'd love to have you folks. To learn more, I got a lot of information on Behat from the documentation and from a presentation Behat by example I found was really good, which has a companion. You can look at the slides online and look at the YouTube video, and also check out Cucumber stuff too. Yes, Brian?
Yeah, that's the creator of Behat. It's Konstantiusha.
Yeah,
But
I cannot pronounce his name.
But there's the guy Ryan Weaver, the quote you used earlier on.
Mhm.
He has a set of extra Behat contexts that I remember using a couple months ago to solve a problem that was really difficult. He has a debug context, and it has a step involved to set like a debug point that will stop the execution of your test like mid browser action.
Nice.
Where you can say like, all right, stop. I know it makes it up to this point, and then something blows up, but it happens too quickly for me to see what's going on, or whatever. You can just add in the debug context allows you to have a step that says, all right, stop right here. Let me pull up Firebug, figure out what's going on, or whatever. So that was you don't want it extending things all the time, but it's a good last ditch tool.
Yeah.
If I may share one more lessons learned that we found out this week, remember that when you're using the steps and I follow or and I press, those are explicitly implying that you are looking at either anchor tags or buttons.
Mm-hmm.
If you at any point in time change what those happen to be, regardless of whether or not the words change on them, they stop working.
Right. Right.
So that goes down to the use reliable locators.
Yes.
Part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you guys played with using different drivers besides Selenium?
Not sure.
We've played with some of them. The headless ones we've seen some problems with. I don't know any of the specifics of it, but I know we tried several times to use like the Phantom.js based stuff and just ran into trouble. But what we're testing is fairly JavaScript heavy, and so that's going to play into a lot of things. Usually the rule is when you're not testing something that involves JavaScript, go ahead and use the headless thing. But when you have JavaScript, you're probably going to need an actual browser.
There's actually, so I was looking at Behat a little bit. Well, found Behat very, very recently, and then this popped up, and I was like, oh, hey, Beta, going. But I was looking at the Behat website, and there's also something associated called Mink, which basically is it talks about being an abstraction layer that allows you to tie into 4 different
Right, that's what we're using here, the Mink context.
Right, and
That's
so
the-
Selenium is one, and Sahi,
Yeah, and Zombie.
Gout,
Goot,
Yeah.
Okay, Goot, and
Yep.
yeah, so that abstracts all that.
Yeah.
And it was talking about reasons to use any of those drivers.
And don't just, yeah. When you're learning too, I also want to mention, don't just limit yourself to the Behat presentations. Like look at the Cucumber ones, everything related to the Gherkin language. Because a lot of I found like recently listening to the Cucumber ones really informative. It's the exact same thing, just written in a different language. It's like learning for PHP unit or JUnit or Python's unit tests.
So Gherkin and Cucumber are both basically the same thing, just different syntax.
Yeah, well, Gherkin is the
Cucumber
baseline.
is an implementation.
Right, and Behat's an implementation, right?
Okay, so Cucumber is what, the Ruby version? Or
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
It's like the Java compiler when they used to have geeks, right, or whatever.
Right, the best practices are going to apply no matter the language.
Yeah, so it's,
Did you guys evaluate any of the other BDD things like Codeception?
No.
we didn't. We didn't. Like initially when I got on board, like Jacob had actually started the evaluation in Behat, and I kind of inherited it. And I was like, okay, I got a code base to work with. Let me see what I gotta do here. Crap, I gotta learn a bunch of stuff. Let me run with it. You know, listen to all the presentation, learn what I could. And to be honest, I'm very skeptical of functional testing in general, because if I had to go into me personally, I don't believe that functional testing in and of itself adds any value, where I believe that unit tests add the value. Behat adds the value where just traditional functional tests don't, because of the use case. The use case brings it all together. Otherwise, I think functional testing, you can get the exact same results by just going heavy on unit tests. And you get code coverage, and you get the ability to troubleshoot anything that fails really quickly, and you get quick execution time, and you get stability. But the use case, the ability to validate the use case is what's of value with from Behat.
Gives you a common language to share with the customer.
Yeah, and you have a common language thing with the customer and product. It's especially in Agile where there's no PRD. If I can say, okay, you're giving me a ticket to do this little thing, give me a feature file with the ticket. Oh, great! Now I know not just what this does, I know how it's supposed to do it, how the customer is in theory going to interact with it. I have a way better understanding of my job. You have a way better understanding of what you expect is being delivered, and now we can, at the end, exchange something of meaning to say, I got my job done, and you can communicate to other people, we got our job done, you know, and that becomes the high value.
So it's the kind of thing where, like, project managers and product managers, whoever come up with the feature ideas can learn Gherkin and write the feature. If they want something new, they can write out the feature stuff, the feature files, hand it over to the developer, and you go, aha, okay, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard of companies doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Yeah.
to mention, you have a nice written out set of instructions should you ever get in a situation where you have to do a manual test because you can't run
Yes, you know exactly the steps to follow.
It's perfect for that.
Yeah. Customer support says, well, how is this supposed to work? Well, here you go. Oh, okay, thanks. What's the workaround? Well, you're doing this scenario, and this other scenario in this file does the same thing but differently. Here you go. And that's, I think, where the value is, because especially when I had that slide with the haterade, that's me. Right? When it comes to function tests, I completely I just think it's, after having to deal with it at multiple companies, and at the last company, I think we had a breath of what I call sanity when we said we're doing functional tests and we're doing unit tests. Then we analyzed the bugs that we were finding due to those and bugs we were finding in general, and how effective the unit tests versus functional tests were at finding the bugs and us troubleshooting it. And we found that the unit tests were better for us, more stable for us, and gave us better results than the functional tests. So we did away with functional testing altogether. But they didn't have Behat. They weren't even thinking this way.
Testing, you never really know when you're done.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in general, you don't know. Like you can miss some obscure interaction with, like, if I send this a 7, if I send this, a hex encoded JPEG image or whatever, it's going to break.
Mm-hmm.
But with unit tests, you don't have to fire up the browser. You don't have to fire up anything. You can say, when I run this function, I try all these different inputs and outputs, I know what's going to happen.
And also, when you throw in code coverage too, you get some value with that. I know what's going to happen, because I can't tell you how many times I've been through functional test suite and there's testing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
The thing is, the functional tests express or contract the user of how the site will work.
That's correct.
So necessarily they are kind of brittle and kind of fragile, because whenever you break that contract, you have to fix it.
So it's kind of like, with the functional test would be, if you have a car, it's when I step on the gas pedal, the car goes forward, the car moves, and the unit test would be, talk about, or it's like, when I step on the gas pedal, then it pulls this thing, which then shoots fluid into the engine, and
not even that. That would be probably,
steps.
that would be multiple unit tests.
Right. Well,
like,
it's testing how. Functional test says when I step on the gas, it goes, and unit tests test each step along the way from when you step the gas pedal to making that car actually move.
Yeah.
Right. And when you press on the gas pedal and it doesn't go, what broke?
Unit test is like, does this knob on the radio work?
Right.
Does this button on the radio work? When I twist this, does it?
Functional
Right.
tests will tell you what broke. Unit tests will tell you where.
Yes.
So this difference, you will feel it very, very strongly when your system consists of multiple interconnected components, and eventual behavior requires these components to interact. You can unit test each component separately and everything will be fine, but this doesn't guarantee that altogether will provide you expected results.
No.
Yeah. Well, is it true that
Well, the all plays nice comes into value when you have the use case too. Because if it all just plays nice and things kind of work, it doesn't mean you're actually going anywhere with something working.
Yeah, and this is significant difference between unit testing and integration testing.
would it,
functional?
do you think it's a true statement to say that Behat forces you to write good functional tests? Like,
Yeah,
it's a
if
form-
well, it helps.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Just sales.
But Behat is a form of functional testing.
It is.
It is probably a higher value form of functional
Yeah,
testing.
so you
because
don't
that's a
hate
story
functional
focused.
testing.
Yes.
I hate
You
low
bad
value.
functional
I hate.
testing. You hate disjointed, repetitive functional testing.
I hate disjointed repetitive functional testing. It's like if I had a bunch of you had a bunch of cats and you let them out the box and said run that way, right? That's never gonna happen. Those cats are gonna go everywhere or nowhere, right?
Yeah. So the value of functional testing comes when you have properly defined functional requirements.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And I think it's also it's hard for. I mean, I've seen some of the Behat tests that we've written. We're translating the acceptance test suite, where it's really just like I had an old functional test and now I'm writing it with a feature file, right? It's not a use case still, or it may be a use case, or hopefully you can translate it into a use case. but some of it's like, might not be that meaningful. So it depends on what you do with it, and that gets into the whole code review thing, and people adhering to the philosophy and believing in the philosophy. I think the most important part of BDD is the philosophy. Everything is just code otherwise.
And also with this tool, you get the output of, assuming you're using like a full browser automation thing and not just a headless, the customer can say, all right, give me this feature. You can put the feature file in front of the customer, run the test, and they can watch the browser pop up and do the interactions, and they say, okay, that's exactly what I wanted, or no, this needs to do this, and it's slower and less explicit to like manually go through and click all the bits, but they can see in a very quick way that yes, it just did exactly what I asked it to.
Yeah, or even resolving those arguments where it's like, well, this doesn't work. Okay, well, here's a file. I wrote down the use case. In some ways, we can do it. Do you agree that this does things like we said they should? Well, they say yay or nay, and if they say yay, okay, well, let's run it. It did it. This is how you do it. This is how City does it. We have proof that it did it. If they say nay, okay, how should we change this? What's different about this use case? We have agreed upon use case. Okay, now we have something to change our code to, our implementation to satisfy that need. It's so much conflict resolution in there where time is just have been wasted otherwise.
It's like, no, it doesn't work, and here's how I know. It's like,
Right.
ooh, new scenario, like right there.
Right. And in that case, bam, you just added a lot of value. You got so many people out of a meeting. You got so much time back as a developer where you don't have to go back and forth like, do they like this? No. Do they like this? No. Do they like this? No. Right? You have an understanding as a developer of how the system works where you might not have had it before.
All right. Well, thank
Okay.
you very much.
Hey, take care, guys.
Thank you, George. Very good.